Hello everyone and welcome back to the 411 podcast. So in our last episodes, we spoke to a mindset and accountability coach called Ryan Stevens, and he came on the episode to basically tell us how to practically change our lifestyle and how we can benefit from it, giving us professional advice on the topic. And in today's episode, this is going to be a follow-up episode on basically evolving as a person, and this episode is on healing your inner child.
Yeah, so just a little disclaimer, this episode can be quite triggering. So it's important that you're in a safe space because this is a conversation that needs to be had. So make sure you do some self-care activities, whether that's taking a walk or anything you already had in mind. As we're living in a digital era, there's a lot of trends that come up from time to time, and some of them can be unserious, but other ones can be very true and triggering, that we automatically reject them from being relevant to us. One of the trends at the moment is the importance of healing your inner child and your childhood trauma, and these are going to be the subject of today's episode.
Yeah, and here to join us today is Vismaya, a master clinical psychology student from Swansea University.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Can I ask though, why the name 411?
Of our podcast?
Yeah,
so the 411 means relevant information or the truth, and that's what we strive to share here on this podcast. Relevant information that will positively impact the lives of the youth by creating a safe space where we can talk about issues that impact us or changes we want to see.
But yeah, we want to be that podcast, which is why we're having this conversation today. What is childhood trauma? How can we identify it? Do we all have it? These are the questions I know I have, and we're looking forward to breaking down each of these during this conversation with our special guest, Vismaya. So let's start from the top. What is our inner child?
So according to me, our inner child is a part of us, say a part of our personality, or the way we think, with the way we behave, and our emotions, and it's basically all the things we kind of learned when we were children. And we kind of internalize them, and as we grow up, that kind of affects the way we do the same things now. And talking about healing our inner child, I think healing that inner child means that we look through our experiences and kind of learn how to manage our emotions and what we went through, if that makes sense. Yeah. And talking about experiences, it could be traumatic experiences as well. A lot of us go through childhood trauma, and talking about trauma, I think when it comes to trauma could be anything. I think trauma is very subjective. I mean, what is trauma to me might not be trauma to someone else, and it could be literally anything at any intensity. Tapping into that traumatic experience is a big part of healing our inner child.
Yeah, I think healing your inner child is obviously like when you go into adulthood, you realise that the way that you react in certain situations, which you may not understand, but it's because of how you've grown up, what you've seen, how it's affected you without even realising that it's affected you. And sometimes healing your inner child could be doing things that you were deprived of when you were younger. And getting that like sense of like wholeness when you do it in your adulthood.
Yeah. As kids, when we're growing up, we don't even realize a lot of times that these experiences are traumatic until we're much further into our adulthood, and we're like, oh yeah, that was a pretty traumatic experience. Like for me, say when I was a kid, I was thrown into the pool while learning swimming. As a kid, I never realized that it caused such trauma to me, but as an adult, I look back and I'm like, oh, that was a pretty traumatic experience, even though I didn't think of it that way as a kid. And I think a lot of these traumatic incidents, especially like severe ones or ones with like a lot of intensity, say like abuse or even parental neglect, and a lot of mental illnesses that we not only see in ourselves but also our parents, it kind of becomes into this traumatic experience that we carry on throughout our whole life. and that kind of hinders healing our inner child, don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like as well as about healing your inner child, I think it's like pleasing your younger self, and so that like you're kind of doing things for that person, kind of like separate it, like you've got your younger self and then you've got like the person that you are now, and like looking back you'd want to do things that would make that younger self happy.
Yeah, you're like a safe, like a guardian for your younger self, aren't you?
Definitely. So like adverse childhood experiences, for those who don't really know what that is, it could be like Vismaya said, physical, sexual, mental abuse, parental neglect, mental illnesses, parental separation or like divorces, domestic abuse, and like the list actually goes on. And if you have these experienced adverse childhood experiences, at least 4 of these, you are twice as likely to develop heart conditions, twice as likely to develop cancer, 3 times as likely to develop chronic lung disease, 4.5 times as likely to become clinically depressed, 11 times as likely to get Alzheimer's disease, 12 times as likely to commit suicide. And I just think that's just so crazy, because this is actually a real issue that no one really talks about. If you think healing your inner child, like Kofi said, is just a trend that's going around, no, it's actually a real issue, and it does need to be spoken about.
And yeah, interesting that you mentioned that, because a lot of times, because of these traumatic experiences, we don't think about how it affects our own physical health as well. Like you said, it could lead to so many, physical conditions like heart conditions and lung conditions and all of that. And when it comes to trauma, childhood trauma, I think it's important to mention that there's different kinds of childhood trauma as well. So like the physical trauma, suppose there's a car crash, or like physical harm to your body, like traumatic brain injuries or something, that does lead to a lot of physical illnesses. But when it comes to mental illnesses, a lot of childhood, adverse experiences, like you said, do end up giving you or leading to a lot of mental illnesses as well. I'm not sure if anybody's seen, but the movie Joker, he went through a lot of childhood trauma in terms of, say, physical abuse, and that kind of led to him having a lot of mental illnesses as an adult. And there's a lot of speculation around the same topic, where a lot of psychologists or people analyzing this, they say that he might have a lot of personality disorders because of that childhood trauma.
So in a recent TED talk, it was found that traumatic experiences cause things like death from brain development, problems with the immune system, and even affected the way our DNA was transcribed. Yeah, I've seen the Joker, and I think that's a great example of how childhood trauma ended up affecting him and manifesting in his adult life. Because sometimes being able to identify a life-altering moment is when a specific event happened in your life, and you can see a clear line in who you are before that incident and who you became after the incident happened. So in the movie, I think he wasn't able to see that, but we find out later on that he was being abused when he was a child, and then he grew up to then be the abuser, because before that he was probably a sweet boy, and then after that happened, obviously, if you've seen the movie, you see how it ends, and it's not a good thing.
Yeah, and talking about abuse, I think to an extent, neglect is also a form of abuse, neglect and overprotection. So in a lot of cases, parents are absent, and or because of something they're going through, they can't focus on the child, and they kind of neglect the child, and that kind of adds on to the traumatic experience of kids as well. Yeah, and actually I have seen a lot of these things in when I'm working in hospitals or rehab centers, and in a lot of places, and in a lot of cases I've seen that usually when an adult comes, when we take the case history and stuff, we notice a lot of symptoms or symptoms of traumatic experiences, a lot of trauma response, and a lot of this is usually linked with something they've gone through as kids. So in one case there was this man, and he had problems with substance abuse, and when we dug deeper into his case, we realized that that was a trauma response he had picked up from his father, who dealt with his own trauma in that way. And he kind of looked at that and he was like, okay, that's how my father is dealing with it, and that's how I'm supposed to deal with it. And that's one thing there's a term for it called observational learning, where basically we look at people around us, caregivers, it could be our parents, or it could be any form of authority around us. We look at them, we look at their responses to different things in the environment or situations, and we kind of take that onto us. We kind of internalize it. And I think a lot of cases that I have seen do include that. And when it comes to, say, observational learning, a lot of our conflict resolution skills, our problem solving skills, decision making skills, we kind of acquire that from people around us. We kind of try to imitate them in a way, and they become a model for us.
Have you studied anything that has really stuck out to you that you think you'd want to tell our listeners out there?
Yeah, sure, why not? There's one thing I studied called transgenerational trauma. That's when there's a collective traumatic experience by a whole group, and that kind of the trauma response and the thoughts and emotions, the beliefs in that situation kind of get carried on through generations. For example, say this happens a lot in the queer community, where because as we all know, the queer community has had to go through a lot of traumatic experiences in order to kind of fight for equality, fight for their place in this world, in this society. And a lot of times when people involved in these in these traumatic experiences have children, and then this just gets carried on through societies and through generations, and it becomes a belief rather than experience after a while. And even though this new generation hasn't really gone through that traumatic experience, and that happens in a lot of cultures, in a lot of contexts, they still have that traumatic experience in them, and that is seen through their traumatic responses. And one trauma response that comes to my mind that I drew from my life through therapy was it's not related to transgenerational trauma, but it's just something I noticed, that as a kid I always I always had to kind of fight for my voice, and that kind of led me on to kind of repeating everything I said as I grew up. And when I had interviews or presentations, and even a lot of times when I'm talking to people, I kind of repeat the same thing. And I think to an extent that's a trauma response I used to have, because as a kid, like I said, I always had to fight for my voice, and I'm repeating again. You see what's happening?
Yeah. I think I can relate to that, but not really. I'm quite the opposite. I feel because I didn't really have a voice in the house. I found it quite hard to communicate with people and learn to communicate with people. I think it only took me till last year to do that. I don't know. I felt scared whenever I kind of would share how I felt or my opinion on something. I would always kind of just not keep it to myself, but just say nothing and just say it's fine, instead of actually explain that I'm upset.
Yeah.
Which I ended up kind of going to therapy for last year, which I think is I honestly think everyone out there should get therapy, because I think that although most people say, oh no, it doesn't do anything, or why would I want to open up to a stranger out there, they're going to be able to help you dig out a memory that you kind of are suppressing, and help you deal with traumatic experiences that you have and how it affects your adulthood. And we're all humans, so we can all change how we are as people.
Yeah, so a lot of times when we can't recall these memories and they're very suppressed in our minds, it comes out through, say, physical manifestations. So whenever you encounter a situation that triggers your traumatic experience or your trauma response, it comes through, say, your hands start sweating, or your heart kind of starts beating very fast, there's palpitation. And so trauma response can be behavioral as well as biological. So biological would be, say, like I said, sweating. Behavioral would be, say, the things you do, or the things you think about yourself, or the things you think about others. And I think that plays a very important role in, say, verbal or emotional abuse, and where your body kind of remembers what happens. And yeah, so a lot of times when a similar situation happens or you anticipate it to happen, your body will kind of tense up and give the same trauma response as when the traumatic experience happened.
So yeah, most of us, if not all of us, have wounds from our early life that we need to heal from. While we exist as adults, our inner child is still inside of us, and it's often that part of our personalities that responds to challenges. This means if your 8-year-old self was wounded or traumatized, though you are now an adult, it is that 8-year-old self who responds to similar conflicts in your life because that wound hasn't properly healed. So saying no will be hard for you. You don't set up or enforce boundaries, and you'd rather feel uncomfortable or violate a boundary of your own rather than risk upsetting someone else. You have a harsh inner critic. You may be too critical of yourself. When you achieve something new, you don't take the time to celebrate, or you're a bit judgmental of the things you do and think more time that you could have done better. You have a weak sense of self. If you were taught as a child to prioritize others' happiness and comfort above your own, you likely picked up the habit of changing your personality depending on who you're with. While it served as a survival technique in your early life to modify your personality based on who you were around, as an adult it's likely left you unsure of your own identity. And you can be highly anxious, whether you're with new people or new experiences or a new place. You experience a high level of anxiety when entering a type of situation. There's a lack of control that makes you uncomfortable. When you don't know how to anticipate what will happen or how somebody might behave, your anxiety increases. You need constant reassurance. Much like the trouble with boundaries, learning to be a people pleaser early in your life can leave you without the ability to reassure yourself. You constantly seek external approval. You may feel like a failure if you're told otherwise. And lastly, you have difficulty with strong emotions. You may have difficulty controlling your emotions and frequently feel guilty when you feel negative emotions like anger or sadness. So Vismaya, you're saying something like that with the constant need for reassurance and having to repeat yourself.
So one thing that I saw when I was working with people in the psychiatric hospital was that they were so anxious about this, about the traumatic experience, that they kept on playing it again and again in their mind, and it kind of becomes a cycle at one point, doesn't it? That, you know, you kind of keep on playing this and then it gives you anxiety, and because of that anxiety, you keep on ruminating over the same thing again and again. So we need to break that cycle, and I think breaking that cycle is an important part of healing your inner child. And and like I said, healing your inner child looks different to everybody, and it depends on your traumatic experience. It's very subjective, and so for me, like I said, healing my inner child was standing up for myself and trusting in others. It could be different for someone else.
No, definitely. I think I can relate to that as well. With like my family situation, I think it's definitely trusting others. Obviously, if you don't have a voice at home, it's kind of like learning to actually have a voice and speak your opinion. Even things like, for me, doing activities, like new things, actually makes me so scared because I was never really given the opportunity to ride a bike or actually like go swimming lessons or do this and that. So now, like, whenever I actually do an activity, like, I just panic and I kind of like stall it off, like, okay, I'm not gonna learn this or do this, which I think in my adulthood I'm going to try and get over and kind of like tick off those boxes of, okay, I can do this and this and this. So leading on to like what Vismaya was saying about how you wouldn't really know sometimes you actually need to go seek professional help because you're not aware of why you react to certain things, whereas a therapist would be able to get that. And this has actually come from a therapist himself who we spoke to. He gave an example where a woman would freak out and her body would become tense every time her husband had got close to her and she couldn't be intimate with him. And she then went to therapy to learn, well, what is actually going on here. And her physical body remembered that. And that's why she had reacted like that with her husband. And it just goes to show that we, like as people, sometimes react in ways which we don't really understand, but going to a therapist is probably the best thing for you to do. As much as like you can work on healing your inner child yourself, getting that professional help would help you understand more about yourself that you are not even aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. And because, it sounds cliche, but because we live in this, constantly changing, evolving society, we will always keep on having these new experiences, and a lot of these experiences could be traumatic. And I think healing your inner child, a major part of it would be learning how to deal with the things you've been through and having those coping resources that can enable you to, help yourself in future traumatic experiences that you might have. And yeah, because honestly speaking, you can't go in the past and change it, can we? So we need to deal with the present and how we can, use the resources available to us to help our inner child and our future self.
Definitely, yeah. And what would you say healing looks like?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's not going to go away instantly. It's going to be, gradual. And for some people it takes, say, 2 years. Some people it takes 10 years. Some people it takes 2 weeks. So it depends on everybody. And because everybody has different capabilities, they can handle different traumatic experiences differently. And I think we need to recognize that.
I think it's definitely a process. I think it's not like a kind of just like climbing up a mountain or smooth sailing type of thing. I think like you could still be going to like think that you're going up and like up the ladder or whatever, and then like something hits you and then you feel like you're on ground zero again. But realistically you're actually not. You're still on that ladder. So I think it's just like, just treating the whole healing process as like a journey, a long journey, but a journey that does.
Definitely. And for a lot of people, healing their inner child includes, like you said before, doing things they were deprived of, or trying to get into those things that they always wanted to do as kids. And for me it was swimming.
Yeah, and I think also to add on to that, I think like healing your inner child, like we've said, also includes like learning to, like we said, like have that voice, stand up for yourself, be that person for that younger self within you, to make them happy.
And don't be afraid to ask for help, especially professional help, because a lot of psychologists and therapists are qualified. They know how to help you. And I would definitely suggest seeking professional help. And in addition to that, a lot of people do seek, say spiritual aids or faith. That's an important part of healing as well. For a lot of people, that's what gets them through and helps them.
Yeah, definitely.
I think always ensure to heal and seek professional help in order to dig out these problems that our brains hides from us, and heal from our traumatic experiences. Swansea has a lot of great avenues for you to do this. So free counselling therapy sessions. If you go to Mind, we have ACC in Swansea and Bain Mental Health Support for ethnically diverse people. So those are all options for you, and of course you can always go to your GP and things like that also.
And most importantly, speak about your issues and start your healing inner child journey. Start to recognize patterns of behaviour that you think are causing quite some damage in your life, and trying to like, okay, well, what can I do now to like actually not do this anymore, because I don't like who I've become, or I don't like how I'm reacting to things. Because at the end of the day, like, we all have the power to change who we are.
And I think it's important to be kind to yourself the most, because you've been through a lot, and I'm sorry you had to go through that, but you're human. We're all human. Our trauma responses are natural to us, and I think it's important to be kind to ourselves and treat us with the same kindness you would treat someone else who had a traumatic experience. And
I hope this episode has been very enlightening for our listeners who are listening out there. I really hope that this episode has helped you recognize that you all need to heal your inner child, and that this is actually a real big issue. And to hope maybe even if this episode even encourages you to actually maybe you've been thinking about therapy and now you think, actually, yeah, like this episode has actually pushed me to go and get therapy, or go to ACC in Swansea if you are based in Swansea, or Bay Mental Health, and kind of like reach out to do this to transform and evolve as a person.
Yeah, definitely.
Guys, stay tuned to our next episode where we're going to be doing a third episode on this whole healing lifestyle type of journey. It's our final episode on this chain of episodes about evolving as a person. So stay tuned for that.
Podcast rating number 1 is the 411. Thank you for listening. Till next time, guys.
Bye!